All right. Well, welcome to the Canadian Immigrant Web Conference Series in partnership with Osgoode Professional Development. My name is Vaisakhi Roy, editor at Canadian Immigrant, and I am so excited to welcome you all to today's presentation. We're just going to wait a few more seconds. Laura?
We're good to go.
We're good to go. Welcome again. This industry specific web conference is for internationally educated lawyers and legal professionals. Please note this session will be recorded and posted on our website, canadianimmigrant.ca, to watch for those who cannot attend in person today. Well, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our first of two keynote speakers from the Osgoode Professional Development Program, Megan Thomas. Megan is the Director, Professional Graduate and International Programs at Osgoode Professional Development and oversees the Professional LLM program, which provides graduate legal education designed for experienced lawyers and professionals and complementary non-credit programs designed for internationally trained lawyers. If you have any questions for Megan, please feel free to type them in the chat box or the Q&A buttons and type them on the right-hand side, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And a reminder again, this session is being recorded and posted on our YouTube and website, canadianimmigrant.ca, for those who cannot attend in person today. Well, thank you, Megan, for joining us today, and please take it away.
Thanks, Vasaki. So it's a pleasure to be here. We always enjoy joining these web conferences and hope that we can share some information that might help people depending on what stage of your journey you are. You may still be elsewhere outside Canada and planning your arrival, or maybe you've arrived recently or are thinking about transitioning back sort of into a more legal setting from working in something else since you arrived in Canada. So we see lots of different people at different stages joining these web conferences. So I'm going to share my presentation. And what I'm going to do is I always try to keep my formal presentation relatively brief because there are always lots of good questions from our participants. So I want to make sure that I leave time at the end. And I will also foreshadow that Michael, my colleague, who's going to present next, will talk more about the employment side of things in terms of working in the legal profession and in areas related to law. So my presentation is going to focus more on educational options that you might consider if you are an internationally trained lawyer. And sometimes we also get other legal professionals like paralegals joining the session. So I'm also happy to answer questions to the extent that I can about other professions that are related to law and education options that you might have available. I'm going to talk first about outcome options because it's always good to start with, where are you trying to get to? What kind of outcome are you looking for? Because that can inform what pathway you take. So we'll go through some different educational and training options by outcome. And at the end, we'll talk about some different practical considerations, which are also important to think about before you embark on one of these pathways. So the first thing to think about when you're thinking about any kind of education or training option is where do I want to be at the end of this program? Where am I trying to get to? Am I looking to become accredited to practice law as a lawyer here in Canada? Am I looking to work in a non-practicing capacity? So basically in a job where my legal background, my legal education, my legal training from another jurisdiction might be helpful and beneficial, but perhaps I would not be working in a law practice capacity. So some examples of this would be things like, again, working as a paralegal, working in a law firm in a consulting role, working in a corporate setting. So let's say in a bank or in a corporation, in a regulated field where you're doing something that isn't law practice, but where knowledge of the law and perhaps practical experience in those areas could be very beneficial to the role. And those are just a few examples. So there's lots of things that fall under that basket of non-practicing lawyer jobs, including the jobs that Michael and I have at Osgoode. So education is another area where you can work as a non-practicing lawyer. You may be looking for an entry job into the Canadian market. And so sometimes, people are maybe having, as I get to in the next bullet point, there may be a longer term goal to practice law, or there may be a longer term goal to work in a particular industry, for example. But often, we need to get working. We need to generate income. We need to perhaps work on some networking. We may want to work to be practicing language skills if you're coming from a non-English speaking environment. So there can be lots and lots of reasons that you want to get out into the workforce quickly, and you may not be able to immediately get into the long-term goal because, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, for some, the journey to becoming accredited to practice law can be lengthy. And so, it's a perfectly common and normal and expected part of the journey that you may be working on this in stages. And so we'll talk about some things that may be helpful if you're looking for something temporary, something sort of at a more junior level, something that's maybe adjacent to what you might be looking for long term. There may be some sort of quicker things that you can be doing to get ready for the job market. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk about education options to become accredited. And in Canada, as some of you will know, we do have sort of two legal systems, and in fact, more than two if we think about Indigenous legal traditions in Canada, where there's some self-governing areas within the country. But primarily, when we think about the structure of the Canadian legal system, we think about the common law and the civil law jurisdictions within the country when we think about provinces and territories. And so what I'm going to be talking about in terms of accreditation covers all the provinces and territories except Quebec. Quebec has its own system. And so if you're looking to practice law in Quebec, then you would need to consult the information from the Barreau du Québec because they have their own system for internationally trained lawyers to enter profession there. In all the other provinces, Ontario, where we are, and all of the other common law provinces and territories, the body that sets the requirements for internationally trained lawyers and law graduates is called the National Committee on Accreditation. And that's a committee of the Federation of Law Societies, which is made up of all of these law societies throughout Canada. And it sets the requirements for anybody who has graduated from law school or who has practiced law in anywhere outside of Canada. So anywhere from jurisdictions we think of as reasonably similar, like England or the US or Australia, to jurisdictions where the law and legal system is very different, such as many of the civil law or non-common law jurisdictions around the world. And so if you want to go through the process to practice law here and you're a lawyer or a law graduate from anywhere outside Canada, then you would go through the NCA process. And so what that requires is an application to the NCA for them to evaluate your credentials. They have a very comprehensive website where you can go on and take a look. You can do a little bit of self-diagnosis on their website. You could fill in some information and it will give you a preliminary idea of what your process might look like. But ultimately, there's no substitute for going on, doing the application, and then getting your evaluation back. Now, there are elements of individuality to the way the assessment works, but in general, the assessments that come back from the NCA do fall into a number of buckets where we see sort of common profiles of internationally educated lawyers. And so the typical ones that we see very often would be, again, civil law or non-common law jurisdictions, common law jurisdictions where you did your legal education in person, and common law jurisdictions where you did your education online by correspondence or through online education. And so when we think about what the requirements look like for different categories of candidates, typically if you have a non-common law background, so you're coming from most parts of Latin America, most parts of Europe, many parts of Asia, there are many, many jurisdictions around the world that do not use a common law system. Typically, the NCA will issue you a letter saying, we see that you have graduated from law school. We see that you maybe have practiced, but if you don't have what they consider to be significant or substantial or sufficient common law exposure, so you've never had common law training before, they will require you to pursue some educational options to get common law exposure. So this is a profile for which really you don't have many options but to seek an educational pathway to get that common law exposure so that you can pursue accreditation. For common law in person, the evaluations provide usually more flexibility. And so if you're coming from a common law jurisdiction, India, Nigeria, and Australia, England, many jurisdictions around the world that have common law systems, and you've done your law degree in person, or at least a significant chunk of it was in person, you typically will receive an evaluation that says you can either write exams with the NCA in a number of subjects, and that number has a minimum of, there are now a minimum of actually 7 areas that you have to prove competency in. And so that number can go from 7 and it can go upward from there, depending on your profile. Or you have the option of taking courses or a program that cover those subjects. So common law in person tends to give you some flexibility in terms of your accreditation journey. If you've done your legal education online or by correspondence by distance, then usually, again, you are in the category of people who would have to pursue some education in person to be able to be accredited because the Canadian system requires some in-person education. Now, if you have gone to an in-person bar school somewhere, if you've been licensed to practice, there can be factors that lessen the requirements for accreditation. But again, generally, if you've got a distance education background, you would be needing to go back to school in person for a period of time. And so obviously, what this means is depending on how the NCA has evaluated your credentials, what they've told you, you may have a number of options, or you may really just have kind of one option that you have to start with to be able to pursue accreditation. When the NCA does your evaluation, they typically will give 5 years to complete the requirements. And so that's a pretty generous amount of time. And so, our advice is usually if you're actively thinking about pursuing accreditation and getting back to law practice here, then you should apply for your assessment because that 5-year window is a pretty good amount of time to finish whatever your requirements might be. So what program options might you have depending on what your NCA assessment looks like? Well, the programs that are out there are quite a few throughout Canada. There are some LLM programs, including the ones that we run here at Osgoode PD. Um, Different LLM programs will provide you different levels of access to courses that would meet your NCA requirements. Here at Osgoode PD, we have about 16 specializations within the LLM. There's a specialization called Canadian Common Law, and that one is primarily intended to get you access to NCA requirements. But there are other ones that will give you some access to NCA requirements, but cover other material as well. And so thinking about, again, how flexible or not your NCA requirements are, then that will help you decide kind of what educational programs might be the best fit for you. Some LLM programs have online options. So again, our program with the professional LLM in Canadian Common Law, you can do that part-time online. You can do it part-time in person, or you can do it full-time in person. Other schools across the country have different options. Some law schools in the country have programs that are not LLMs, but that are certificate programs or diplomas, or simply access to take courses from the JD. So again, here at Osgoode, not in our area at Osgoode PD, but in the main Osgoode JD area, they provide access to take upper year courses for NCA purposes. So multiple options just within one law school. So you'd want to think about, do I want or need to study in person depending on my NCA requirements? Am I interested in studying online? Do I want to do part-time or full-time? And then look at the options across the country that may be available for you. Um, Again, single course options, so those might be available at the JD level. We have students who come to us and take single courses for NCA purposes. So let's say you have an assessment that allows you to take either exams with the NCA or courses with a law school. You might decide to do a combination of those things. So maybe you take a few NCA exams and you come and take one or two courses with us in areas that you want to really learn the material, or you're a bit more worried about the self-study toward the NCA exams. On that theme of studying for NCA exams, there are a number of tutors and businesses out there that help you prepare for NCA exams. There are a number of social media groups of NCA candidates where those providers will promote their services, where people will share information about preparing for the exams. If you're going to write the NCA exams, many people simply self-study based on the material that's available on the NCA website. But again, there are lots of different services out there. There aren't currently any official law school NCA exam programs. And so they would all be through sort of private providers. So important to take a look at what they provide and seek some information before you invest your money in those kinds of providers. But there are many of them out there. Another thing to think about if you're looking at the accreditation process is that you might feel like you need some support in areas that will help you be successful in the process, or that you want to do before going into an LLM program or before completing your NCA exam. So language proficiency is a big one. If you haven't applied for your NCA assessment yet, since March 1st of this year, there's now a new process for language screening with the NCA. And so one of the initial things that happens when you apply for your assessment is there's a language screening that you'll go through, and that will help you determine whether you might have some work to do on language proficiency to be able to make your way through those programs. Now, it's important to note that the NCA's language proficiency requirement is lower than most of the educational programs in Canada for NCA candidates. And so even if you're passing the NCA screen, you might need to still boost your academic proficiency for admission to an LLM program, for example. So there are language programs out there. We have a specific legal English program that we run here at Osgoode in a partnership with our English Language Institute at York. And that one is particularly helpful because it focuses on legal material, legal terminology, the style of writing in Canadian legal usage. And so that's one that we think is particularly helpful for people thinking about accreditation or working in the legal profession. But there are, of course, lots of other good English language, general English language, or academic English programs across the country. Some candidates are looking to improve writing um, or do other non-credit programs. One program option that we have here at Osgoode PD is called the Graduate Diploma in Foundations of Canadian Law. And so that's a program that people will sometimes do for a more gentle introduction to Canadian law. It can be done at a slightly lower language proficiency level than an LLM. There are non-credit writing programs available through Osgoode PD. But again, all of these areas have multiple offerings at the college level through continuing education providers and at universities. So important to think about kind of what skills you might be looking to build before embarking or as a complement to working your way through the process, particularly if you're planning to just write the NCA exams. That process doesn't necessarily give you a lot of insight into where your skill level is in things like legal writing, because those exams are just pass fail. And so these are areas you may want to think about in terms of boosting your skill or getting some assessment of your skill to make sure that the outcome that you have at the end of your accreditation process is what you're hoping it to be. Okay, so that's education for accreditation. We'll now talk briefly about non-practicing careers. So again, I threw out some ideas a few minutes ago at the outset of the presentation. These could be things like working in a bank, in anti-money laundering, or in documentation or negotiation. Could be something like working as a policy analyst within a government ministry. It could be working as a paralegal or law clerk within a law firm. It could be working as a consultant to the legal industry. So there can be so many ways in which you can be working in something that touches law, but you aren't actually providing legal services or legal advice within your role. You might be working with legal departments or lawyers, but you're not doing the work specifically of a lawyer in the role. And so, an initial thing to think about when you are considering non-practicing roles, very often there can be good opportunities to continue in a related field where you may have experience either from another jurisdiction or from something that you've been doing since arriving in Canada. And so if you're looking at continuing in an area you have experience and knowledge in, you may need nothing or you may only need limited sort of retraining or education to make yourself competitive and successful in a non-practicing role. If you're looking to switch into a different field, then you might want to look at something more involved in terms of education. So there are so many options here, and of course, they're going to be related to the field, industry, practice area of interest to you. So as I mentioned, just as one example, here at Osgoode PD, we have many specialized LLM programs, tax, financial law, health law, labor and employment, constitutional law. There are so many different areas that people can study. And that could be, again, to sort of try to get into a newer area or build on some limited knowledge that you already have, or to develop really deep understanding of the Canadian landscape in a particular area of law. Some people will just do single courses. So again, to sort of play on my example of working in anti-money laundering in a bank, that's an area where we have a course available within our international business law and financial law LLMs. So that might be something where you just want to take one course. Many other institutions out there offer programs that may be of interest and may be helpful. Some of these might be specific programs that are for working in a regulated area. So an example that is popular for a lot of internationally trained lawyers who are interested in immigration is to perhaps become an immigration consultant. So there are specific programs to do that. Some people will become a paralegal, which in Ontario is a regulated profession with the Law Society of Ontario. So again, there are specific programs you can take to become a licensed paralegal. In other areas, the work that you're looking at may not be regulated. Not everything is. And so you may just be looking for subject matter knowledge, or you may be looking for skills. And that's actually a really important thing to think about when you're looking at educational options. Am I looking for practical training, or am I looking for subject matter knowledge? What is the outcome here that I'm looking for? There are many non-degree and non-credit programs as well. So again, just to use our example here at Osgoode PD, we run a lot of short courses and certificate programs that are open enrollment. So you can simply go on the website, sign up for those. There are many providers of legal and other kinds of non-credit programming out there. So to continue on my example of working in a bank, at Osgoode PD, we have lots of non-credit programs that touch on financial regulation. So again, that might be an option that's of interest depending on what kind of learning you're looking for from your educational opportunity. So lastly, in terms of options, we talked at the outset about, maybe you're just looking to get into the workforce quickly. And so this may not be to move into your optimal or ideal or long-term role, but you want to do something to, again, be generating some income, perhaps learning some skills, getting a network, practicing your Canadian legal English. There can be so many reasons that you want to get into the workforce quickly. So again, language programs and writing programs, things that are very practical, can often be helpful here, and single courses and certificates in continuing ed. So again, here, this is where sometimes programs like college programs can be helpful, or you may just need a quick language boost, or you may need nothing at all. So, Michael's going to talk about the employment side of things in his presentation, but these things are very interconnected. So knowing what you need to be competitive and be successful for a particular kind of role will then inform which options take. So thinking about your practical considerations, again, when you're looking at what do I want to do? Do I need to take a program or a course or a certificate? Obviously, we all have budgets. And so we think a lot about the budget versus value proposition. If you have a budget that is very strict, then you may not be able to exceed that. You may only need to look at things that are within your budget, but it's also important to look at options for financing. And so, for example, is there provincial student loan funding available for particular kinds of jobs? For particular kinds of programs? Is that something that has a good cost benefit outcome in terms of improving your options to get into that role that you want longer term? Length of a program. So again, looking at something like an LLM degree, that's going to be usually 1 to 2 years. Other programs can be very short. If you're taking a certificate program, that might only be 3 or 5 days. So huge spectrum in terms of length. Time commitment is also a big thing. So if you're working and you want to do a program, you may want to look for a part-time program. Make sure that, whatever time commitment that you can make the time to complete that successfully. If you decide that, what, I want to go full time, can you make that work with your other commitments in your life, whether that's work or family or other things? And so thinking about that realistically before you embark on those options. And does the program that you're looking at have some flexibility? So again, for example, with our program, you can switch from part-time to full-time and vice versa during a program if you need more flexibility. So these would be the things to take a look at when you're considering different options. What credential are you going to get? So sometimes people think, it would be really great to do something that gets me a degree or a credential at the end. So yes, I would like to complete a Master of Laws. I would like to do an undergraduate degree. I would like to do a diploma. Credential can also be important when we look at regulated professions. So for example, if you want to be an immigration consultant, there are specific kinds of programs that you need to take. So you need to make sure that that credential corresponds to what the regulator requires. Then, on the topic of value, for the investment that you're making in the program that you're looking at, what else do you get other than just the courses and the degree, for example? So again, to use our own example here at Osgoode PD, we provide academic support, career support, and wellness support for our students. That's part of the service that's provided when you're doing a degree. That helps you to take in context the fee that you're paying for the program. Now, if those services aren't things that you think you're going to use or benefit from, or you're not looking for them, then perhaps you can look at educational options that are less expensive, but important to know kind of again on that value side of things for the money that I'm paying. What am I getting as part of this program? What other benefits might there be? What other services might there be to help me be successful both during my educational journey and in getting whatever outcome I want at the back end? So, as promised, that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. While I start looking at questions, I'm going to leave up here our website as well as the contact information for our recruitment team. And we are always happy to receive questions. We do our very, very best to be helpful in providing information. Even if you're asking about something that we might not provide, we'll try to give you the best insight that we can into what else might be out there. We try to be warm and helpful and supportive to people who contact us. We run information sessions and Q&A sessions on a very regular basis, and you can sign up for those through our website. We have a contact us form on the website as well. If you contact us and you'd like to set up an advising session or you'd like a call back by phone, absolutely, we're happy to do that. We just like to receive the initial contact either through the website or by email, so we have a little bit of information about you when we organize that outreach. Oh, shall we pass to some questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Megan. I was just looking at the chat, and Michael has been answering quite a few questions in the chat. One recent one that's come in is there a remote option for the legal English program?
Yes, our legal English program is an online program, actually. We have run it in person in the past, and we may do that again in future. But currently, we're offering it as an online program. And we're actually just finishing up the current offering. Certainly, we're we're eager to hear from people who are interested in that program so that we know how much demand there is for offerings. At this point, we're planning to run that again next spring and summer. And so that would be the next time that we have it planned to offer. But if we hear from people that they would like more offerings, we'll do our best to mount something else before that.
All right. There's one more. For admission to the LLM Common Law part-time program, is there a minimum grade or honor standing required for for applicants who've completed intensive advanced legal English program? That's
So yeah, so I'm glad someone asked about grades because that's always a big source of stress for applicants to LLMs. So I'll give the disclaimer that different institutions, different law schools probably have different approaches to this. So don't assume that my answer is going to be applicable if you're applying to U of T or U of Alberta or UBC or any of our other law schools across Canada. One of the things that's great about the landscape here in Canada is that the programs at different law schools are all different. So you're going to see, different benefits and features of programs. So for us, when we look at the professional LLM specifically, it is as the name says, a professional master of laws. And so they're really the overarching consideration that we look at when we look at applicants is we prefer people who have some practical experience,
Mhm.
either as practicing lawyers or in other areas where they're going to have touched law or perhaps they had a pre-law career. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. So if you're a more recent graduate, you're still welcome to apply. But we do like to see candidates who have some professional experience because our program is designed for there to be interaction in the classroom, for there to be discussion of both the theoretical aspects of the course material and how things actually work in practice. So we really like that discussion to be taking place. And so that's a very important factor in looking at applications to the program. In terms of grades, I would say the best way of thinking about it is there's really a sliding scale, and that scale is recency.
Mhm.
So the more recently you graduated from law school, the more closely we're going to look at those grades.
Right.
Because what we're looking for when we admit people is, do we think that this person can get B or better grades and really thrive in the program? And so if you have recent grades that are quite low, that might give us some concern about whether you would perform well in the program. If your grades are 5, 10, 15, 20 years old, as many of our applicants' grades are, of course, we still require transcripts. We're still going to take a look at those grades, but they are far in the mists of time as compared with probably lots of work experience that you have recently. And so those grades don't necessarily tell us a lot about your academic capability today. So, so again, we still look at them. If you have very low grades on transcripts, even if they're dated, we always recommend that you try to give us some context for that on your application. There are spots on the application form to comment on that. But again, we're not going to automatically say somebody who has low grades from 10 years ago is not a good candidate for the program because that's simply not true. People change and they acquire new skills. And so when we talk about our application process, um, really the only things that are non-negotiable for the LLM in Canadian common law are you must have a law degree,
Mhm.
or if you don't have a law degree, you need to have an NCA assessment. So if you come from a jurisdiction where you can become a lawyer without earning a JD or LLB equivalent. So the example we come across the most frequently is in England. There's a graduate diploma in law program you can do as a route to becoming a lawyer. If you have a GDL, that is not a JD LLB equivalent. We will still look at you for admission, but you need to have your NCA assessment that tells us that you are eligible to move through the accreditation process. The other thing that's not negotiable is if we require language proficiency testing, you have to provide it and you have to have met the minimum requirements. And that's because unlike grades, which again are really context specific for the jurisdiction and when you did them, um, in the common law program in particular, because we have to do time limited exams, because you're doing lots of in-class activity, language proficiency is really important. We know language tests aren't perfect, but they are a pretty good indicator of at least that aspect of readiness for the program. So you have to meet those requirements. Other than that, everything else we really view with a holistic lens, and we're looking at, what is this person bringing to the table? Do we think that they will be successful in the program?
Right. Thanks so much again, Megan. I think we can take one quick question. There's one question about it says the bursary and loan ratio for OSAP applicants will change for those who apply in August. What do you think are the chances of submitting an application and getting it approved before August?
So OSAP, we actually have very little expertise at the program level with OSAP. Um, um, our colleagues at Central Student Financial Services at York are the OSAP experts in-house. Um, I think that ultimately OSAP is the determinant of how much you get depending on your financial need. And as the person who asked the question has alluded to, there are some changes coming. And usually with um, government changes of that nature, we have very little insight into how that's going to work until it actually happens. And so I think it's my understanding that, if you apply for funding, you need to be admitted to a program. And so if someone was applying to us for winter, I'm not sure whether that August change could be avoided, because ultimately there would be a timing issue. So rather than speculate, I guess I'll just say, unfortunately, yes, we know that change is happening. Um, I should say we also have bursaries in our program for students. And so we hope that if students are negatively affected by changes to OSAP and they still have financial need, they will be able to use our bursary program to help defray some of that cost. And ultimately, this goes back to what I was talking about in terms of cost benefit analysis. Ultimately, if people are doing a program to become accredited to practice law, there are multiple reasons that someone wants to go back to law practice or start law practice here, but a big factor for many people is income potential. And so even if OSAP is changing and will result in higher loan ratios versus bursaries, hopefully that results in people having opportunities to start their own practice or to work in a capacity where they would be generating income that would allow them to pay back those loans.
Thank you so much, Megan, and for all the great information. Megan has also put up contact details where they have their weekly sessions. So feel free to log on to their website, which is also mentioned in Megan's presentation. I hope everyone's taken a note of that. We move on now. Next up, on the Canadian Immigrant Web Conference series for internationally trained lawyers and legal professionals in partnership with Osgoode Professional Development. And our second speaker is Michael Tam. Michael is the program lawyer, professional graduate in international programs at Osgoode Professional Development. He does program and curricular development and academic and career advising for graduate law students. Again, if there are questions for Michael, please feel free to type them in the chat by clicking the chat or the chat or the Q&A button. Type them on the right-hand side. You'll see it right there, and we will answer them after the presentation. Again, a quick reminder that this session is being recorded and being posted on our YouTube and website, canadianimmigrant.ca. So thrilled to have you, Michael, with us. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Michael, and while I do a lot of curricular development, program development with Osgoode PD, I think most people, especially at the program, know me for career advising. And so I'm very pleased to be able to come, sort of share my advice, and answer your questions. But after getting through the NCA, after figuring out what your timelines are, after figuring out how to get through accreditation, one of the things your ultimate end goal is hoping to practice here. And so I'd like to sort of start in all of your minds the kinds of things you need to be thinking about because while the accreditation process, while the licensing process can seem daunting, it's really important to be thinking about what your long-term goals are, what your career goals are, and how your timelines affect that, what goals you're hoping to achieve affect the kinds of decisions you make about when to do your accreditation, who to do it with, the resources you access. And so the first thing I want all of you to do is have a shift in mindset. I think there is, especially from sort of internationally trained lawyers, people coming into Canada, this idea that there's a bias against immigrants, a bias against internationally trained lawyers. And I can't speak to Canada as a whole, but certainly talking to a lot of my colleagues at law firms, legal organizations, ultimately they want to see internationally trained lawyers. They want to increase the diversity in their employee pool. They want fresh ideas. They want new perspectives. They want people who are experienced. And so while you might hear or see or look online, the narrative of I'm not as competitive as a Canadian student. I need you all to remember you're just less familiar with the process. Canadians who are trained here, who have school for 3 years here, who are working with career advisors, going out to events with lawyers all the time, they get familiar with the process over time. And so, as a new immigrant, as somebody who's new to the country or thinking about moving here, right now, attending conferences like this, attending workshops, making sure you benefit from other international trainers who have come before you, you will get familiar with the process. And one of the things about being an internationally trained lawyer that I think is a benefit to all of you is you already know what it's like to be in the workforce. You know what the realities of work is as compared to being a student. And so I have every faith that all of you can get familiar with the process really quickly as long as you access the right resources. Another false narrative that I hear all the time is I need Canadian experience to be competitive. And while having Canadian experience can certainly make you more competitive, I think you can't underestimate the value that your international experience brings. One of the things I say all the time is being a lawyer feels very similar across the world. Being yelled at by a judge, no matter what country you're in, feels the same. Having a client call you at midnight to ask what's happening on their file feels exactly the same. Having a transaction with a major corporation, a multi-million dollar merger, everyone's in that office, no matter where you are in the world, until midnight, trying to make sure that that deal happens. And so the experience you come with matters. But the laws are going to be different. The processes might be different. The forms and terminology you might use are different. The law for sure will be slightly different. But again, all of you know that being a lawyer and studying to be in law school are very different things. And so learning the process of how to practice, learning how to be a lawyer is something that you're going to be able to do while you're working, while you're being trained by the employer. Why an employer would not understand your international experience is because you haven't maybe translated it, right? As a potential employer, I'm not necessarily going to look up the hierarchy of courts in your home jurisdiction. And so the name of the court might not read to me in an understandable way. Is it a court of first instance? Is it an appellate court? Is it a final Supreme Court? Because again, the terminology and the naming of those things will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Similarly, the types of processes you have in place might be called slightly different. In South Asia, there's a lot more writs. In China, there's a lot more civil procedure and code. And so the processes you initiate are slightly different. The legislation itself is going to be called something different. And so one of the things that you really need to think about is not that I need Canadian experience, it's how do I translate my international experience in a way that this employer will understand the depth of it, the scope of it, the complexity of it. And so it's not that you need Canadian experience, it's that you need to translate your international experience in a way that conveys how impressive your international experience is and how relevant it might be to this potential employer. The couple of things that you do need to shift in, however, is that you need to advocate for yourself. One of the skills of being a lawyer is advocacy, both written and oral advocacy. And so you're going to need to practice how to do that in the Canadian context. How do you write applications in a way that speaks up for your skills and your education and your abilities? How do you present yourself in networking and in interviews out loud in a way that aligns with how Canadians hear that you're confident about what you bring to the table? And so there are definitely going to be moments where you have to speak up for yourself. And unlike a lot of you who are coming from jurisdictions where everybody knows the rankings of your schools, everyone knows how impressive that law firm is. Again, the Canadian employer might not spend the time to figure out, oh, this person went to the top law school from their home country. This person worked at their top law firm in this country. They were nationally ranked in this country. They're not going to have time to look that up. And so, can you, on your own, give me that information, present that information, and so that I know exactly why I should consider you? And there are going to be cultural differences. Canadians are very different than even other North Americans and from other places in the world. And so there going to be cultural nuances that you will have to start figuring out. One of the things I like to say is one of the things that I grew up in Hong Kong not talking about all the time was weather, because everyone sort of just experienced weather the same way. Canadians love talking about the weather. It's the first thing they ask you about. It's the first thing they talk about. It's the first thing they complain about. And so even just these cultural nuances in small talk and conversation and how you engage with each other are going to have to change. There are things that you can turn on when you need to engage with a Canadian audience and turn off when you just want to be yourself. But these cultural nuances will help you navigate the recruitment processes, the employment processes a lot easier. One of the things that I do want all of you to remember is the Canadian legal market, the Canadian legal population will want to help. Everyone knows how frustrating it is to get licensed, to get a job, to get their first opportunities. And so everyone will want to help you, but not everyone knows how they can help you. And so one of the things that you will need to do in preparing to engage culturally with some of these Canadian lawyers is be prepared. How can the person who you're talking to potentially help you? Have you done your research in that yet? Have you figured that out yet? Or have you figured out the kinds of things you want to be asking them that only they can answer the questions for? And that will show to whoever you're speaking to that you're prepared to talk with them, that they are the ones who can answer the questions you specifically have, and that you could not have just found that out on your own online doing some initial research. And there are going to be differences in terms of just the applications themselves, the way the resume looks, the way a cover letter needs to present, how to engage in professional networking. All of these things are going to be slightly different and things that you're going to need to practice to get comfortable with and familiar with. And so the first thing I need you to remember is to be confident. Nobody is going to speak up for you but you. Nobody's in the room with you to, cheer you on, to show, whoever you're talking to how amazing you are. And so you're going to have to do that work on your own. And you're going to also have to do the work in thinking about why might a person hire you? What are the skills you bring to the table? How are you unique? How are you different? One of the things that I hear from internationally trained lawyers all the time is, I just want to learn. I just want to grow. I want to get experience. Who doesn't? Every single person who's applying for that job wants those exact the same things, but the things you bring to the table are going to be different from somebody from a different country, from somebody from Canada. And so, do you know what makes you a value add? Do you know what skills you bring that are unique? Can you express your experiences in a way that makes me excited about the complexity of your experience, the sophistication of your experience? And how relevant that might be to the work that I'm going to have you do. To my earlier point, your education and your experience does not speak for itself. So I'm not going to know how amazing your law school from your home jurisdiction might have been. I'm not going to understand how arguing with Queen's Counsel or King's Counsel in your home country matters here until you tell it to me. And so are you able to then figure out how to convey those in a meaningful way to whoever you're applying to or speaking to? And so my last 2 points are exactly the same, right? So no one's going to advocate for you but you. So you're going to need to learn how to start doing that both in writing on your applications as well as out loud in person at networking events, in interviews. And you need to know how unique you are. And I think that is the thing that I find a lot of students struggle with, which is, I was just a lawyer. I was doing lawyer work. And so to whoever you're talking to, they understand that. But also, lawyers do lots of different things. They work on different scales of files. They work on different lengths of files, and they've done different types of work in their home jurisdictions. How can I distinguish you from somebody else? How can I know the kinds of work you've done that are unique to you, that are unique to your jurisdiction, that help add to what I'm going to have you do if I potentially hire you? So a lot of this takes a lot of self-reflection, self-criticism, as well as confidence to present yourself forward. And these things can only improve with practice. Once you've gotten in the right mindset, then you start job hunting. One of the things that a lot of my students wish existed was, isn't there just one website where all of the jobs that I can apply to exists? Point me in that direction and I can just apply for all of them. And unfortunately, that doesn't exist. There's no one place for all of the jobs with all of the different job titles that you uniquely are eligible for that you can then apply for. You need to know what you're looking for. You need to know where you are in the process. You need to know what kinds of things you are and aren't eligible for. And so after Megan's presentation, hopefully you've situated yourself a little bit more in thinking about, what is my timeline for accreditation? What is my timeline for licensing? At what point do I want to be a practicing lawyer? And once you have that in mind, you can then start thinking about what kind of jobs you might want to look for. There are not a lot of job titles once you are called that you can look for. Whereas when you're still in the accreditation and licensing process, the job titles that exist are actually quite regulated and quite defined. And so you're going to see all of these terms, right? 2L summer student, OCI articling, LPP placements. What do those mean? So again, thinking about when you're going to be accrediting with the NCA, when you're going to be licensing with the Law Society, and then when you're going to be a called lawyer, these are the jobs that students and NCA candidates are potentially eligible for, depending on where they are in the process. So a 2L summer student is a summer student job at a law firm or a legal department. They typically take place in between the years of law school. So Canadian law students are in school from about September to April, and so they're free from about May to August. And so these 2L summer positions are meant to be jobs that somebody who's finished their second year of law school going into their third year of law school that take place during that summer. And so this is something that happens in the summer, and this is somebody who's 1 year away from being eligible to be a licensing candidate. And so if you think that you are interested in being a licensing candidate, going through the licensing process in, 2028 or beyond, then you can apply now for summer jobs in 2027, because the idea is that this is a summer job that takes place 1 year before you're ready to be licensing. You're going to hear the term on-campus interview, OCI, and this is part of the second year summer recruitment process where firms will interview specific students from different Canadian law schools. And for internationally trained lawyers, there's a specific day that employers interview internationally trained lawyers and NCA candidates on. And these are interviews that are the first stage of interviews for these summer jobs for next summer. Articling and the LPP placements are part of licensing. And so this is after you've done the accreditation process and you are now a licensing candidate with, for example, the Law Society of Ontario. And as a part of being a licensing candidate, you need to do legal training supervised by a lawyer. And so articling is a 10-month articling experience where you are doing work for a law office or a law department, and all of your work is being supervised by a licensed lawyer who is responsible for all of the work product that you produce. And the law practice program placements are a 4-month placement as a part of the law practice program, which is a pathway to licensing that is parallel to articling. So you can either do articling or you can do the law practice program and the law practice placements, but they are the 4-month placement that allows you also to be in a legal office supervised by a law practice placement articling principal, and they will monitor and oversee all of your work. And so again, you can see it really depends on where you are in the process when you expect to license as to what kinds of jobs you apply for. Also, be mindful that only a certain number of firms will participate in these structured recruitment processes. And so it is the major national law firms, the major multinational law firms, some of the biggest government agencies that participate in this structured, 2L summer recruit on-campus interviews, hopefully then to hire all of their articling students from those pools. Whereas there are thousands of other law firms in Canada. There are lots of ad hoc opportunities that come up both for summer roles as well as for licensing roles for articling or LPP placements. And so you want to be mindful also, are these the kinds of legal offices I want to join, or do I want to look for other kinds of opportunities elsewhere? One of the things that you do have to remember, however, in Canada, being in a legal role is not necessary to becoming a licensed lawyer in articling or to get your next role as an associate. In many of the other countries that people come from, being a paralegal or a legal assistant or a law clerk or an intern is a necessary step before you are called in that jurisdiction. In Canada, they are not necessary steps. You do not have to have been a paralegal or a legal assistant or a law clerk or an intern in order to enter the licensing process. And so many students think of this as a stepping stone opportunity to becoming a lawyer. What I need you to remember is these are not necessarily stepping stone roles to becoming a lawyer. And many firms who are hiring for a paralegal or a legal assistant or a law clerk, they are looking for somebody who's doing that full time, whose entire career that might be. And there are many individuals who do spend their entire careers being in these kinds of roles and titles. And so it is not a necessary step in order to becoming a lawyer. They are roles that can help get you experience in Canada. But then one of the things I tell my students when they're applying for these roles is because these are careers in themselves, you then need to, in your application, very clearly situate how this role is going to be aligned with your ultimate career goals. Because if I, as the employer, need a legal assistant for my 6 really busy lawyers, I want somebody who's in it for the long term, or at least can commit to enough time to support my lawyers. What I don't want to see as an employer is somebody who's applying to be a legal assistant, but really hoping to get an articling job. And therefore, I will then have to replace this legal assistant in 3 months or in 6 months or whenever you decide you want to move on to the next phase of your career. And so again, be very mindful about the kinds of roles you're applying for and convincing the employer, this is the job that makes sense for me right now. This is the job I'm eligible for, and this is how you get a return on your investment in me in hiring me. And then the other two terms I have here, intern and consulting, again, are not regulated terms here. And so in some countries that you come from, intern, it, again, is part of the schooling process. We don't have those kinds of positions here in the same structured way. And so those are things you might negotiate on your own, but they're not expected at a law firm or recognized roles in law firms typically. So where to look for jobs? So one of the things that I like to say is if you find it online, so has hundreds of other people. And so a passive online search of the job forums that exist out there is never going to generate the kind of excitement about you as a candidate, as a personal connection, as a one-on-one relationship. And so while you can look online, what makes your application stand out if you are applying is if you've already made a direct connection to that employer. And so networking is vital. Networking is the way that you stand out in a stack of 500 applications. Being able to say, oh, I met your current articling student, the senior partner, and the legal recruiter at your firm. I know so much about what your office does. I know everything about how you operate. That's going to really set you apart from all of the other candidates. And so while there are online postings, our students get access to my career job posting for, all of the Canadian schools. Ultimately, what's going to help you stand apart is, again, having those direct conversations, having those coffee chats, learning about those offices and employers in a more meaningful way. So you're going to have to do your research. You're going to have to research the firms, you're going to have to research the people, and then you're going to try to get sort of coffee chats, FaceTime, Zoom calls, so that you learn more than just what's on the website and what's online. And then, so once you've made those connections, you have to prepare your application. And so your application really needs to convey to me that you're not just applying to 300 jobs, but that you've really spent the time to figure out why my firm makes sense for you, why you're aligned with how we do things, that your experience and education and the skills you bring and the passion you have are exactly what I'm looking for. And so the more you tailor it to each employer, the more that employer is going to feel like, hey, this person really made an effort for this job. Let's consider them. Because it's very apparent when an application is a template application that's being sent out where one sentence or or one paragraph is being replaced for a different employer. It's also very evident now more and more when people are using AI to generate their cover letters because they all sort of sound very similar and they're not written in the way a legal writer would write. And so you have to be mindful of your preparation time, right? Because the research and the drafting and the tailoring is going to take time, which means the more you want a job, the more you want to tailor it, which means you might not be able to apply to 50 or 100 jobs. You might only have time to really make a good application for like 10, 20, or 30. Application documents. So typically firms here are looking for you to have a cover letter. and the cover letter really needs to tell me who you are, what your narrative is, tell me a story about who you are and why you're a good fit for my office. It needs to have a resume that really highlights the skills that are relevant from your past experiences, as well as all the memorable experiences that you bring to the table, so I can remember you in a stack of applications. You need all of your post-secondary school transcripts. So from your qualifying law degree, any graduate degrees you have, any other undergraduate programs, even if they're not in law that you have, basically anything post-secondary is usually what you need to include. If none of them are translated, you want to make sure you have an official translation, a certified translation, for example. And for a lot of you, you might also want to make sure to see if your schools have a grading scale, a chart, a table to make sense of the grading that your school does, because some people come from jurisdictions with a 16-point scale or an 8-point scale or a 32-point scale. And so employers, again, don't always understand what to make of some of these transcripts. So having that kind of legend or table that a school has generated is going to help them understand and put context to some of the grades that you have. Typically, they're going to ask for reference, at least contacts, if not letters. And so you want to make sure you have, two recent references, whether academic or professional, that really speak to the skills that you need in that job. You want to make sure you also have a writing sample prepared, because sometimes employers will want to see an example of your legal research and writing. So, something in the 5 to 10 page range is typically fine. If you have longer, that's fine too, as long as it really is the best example of your most recent abilities in legal research and writing. So don't pull out the legal research paper you did 20 years ago in law school, because that's not going to be reflective of your abilities now. Make sure you save any posting that you're applying to, because I often see students freak out that the posting has gone down and it's disappeared and I don't remember what it says. So always save it. Save it in case you are asked for an interview as well, because then you can refer back to what the job posting said and address those kinds of points in an interview. And then in terms of format, font, and length, just make sure you're editing it well. Font, is legible, hopefully 11 point or higher. Be kind to whoever your reader is. In terms of format, you have 1 page for a cover letter and 2 pages for a resume. And so when we're talking about resumes, we're looking at a 2 page resume with a header. Typically in a Canadian legal resume, there's no objectives or summary section, because one of the things lawyers like to say is prove everything you're saying. And a summary section and an objective section usually are just qualitative statements with no proof. I'm great. I have great interpersonal skills. Prove it. And how you prove it is by actually using bullet points in your work experiences, in your education, in your volunteer experiences, to show me you have the skills you're saying that you have. But education comes first. I typically like to advise students education and qualifications come first. And so it is, all of your post-secondary skills, education, but also, are you called elsewhere? Where are you in the NCA process? Where are you in the Ontario licensing process? And so you make sure that's all up front. Your work experience goes next, and you can see it's in reverse chronological order typically. There's no specific way you need to be organizing this, but again, reverse chronological with, not too many bullet points not being overly long, and really get to the point of like, what are the skills you're bringing up across? What are the examples of work that you've done that prove you have those skills? And making sure every bullet point is written in that way, so that really, when I'm looking at this in 15 seconds, all of the skills that you want me to know you have, all of the most memorable, complex, interesting work that you've ever done really come across to a reader. Avoid lists. So in bullet points, I often see like drafted X, 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 X. I've researched this, 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 this. And where possible, limit your bullet point to one thing, 1 point, one experience, because what we've learned in the psychology of reading and memory is if you write a list, people don't remember the list. People might remember the first couple of things in a list, the middle stuff all disappears. You might get me to remember the last thing. And so again, avoid having bullet points of lists because then it just becomes a list of bullet points with a bunch of lists, none of which I'm going to remember. And then think about having multiple versions. There's not going to be one resume that works for all of your jobs. And so, especially if for those of you who are considering all different types of work, right? Big law, boutique law firm, family law, criminal law, public sector, realize that the skills you're going to have to emphasize, the way you write about your past experiences are going to have to change depending on who that employer is. And so you're going to have to maybe have multiple versions of this that you amend with every application. No one size fits all resume is going to work for every job that you're applying to. And so when we think about skills, think about some of the legal skills that you're going to need to have as a summer student or as an articling student or as a lawyer. And instead of constantly saying research, 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 think about all of the different ways that researching um, exists in legal practice. So research could be researching, it could be fact gathering, it could be client interviewing, it could be planning strategy. Similarly, when you're saying I have excellent interpersonal skills, well, is it about addressing client concerns? Is it about managing client expectations? Is it about protecting client confidentiality? So again, think about the ways you also represent your skills so that it really encompasses all of the different legal skills you have and so that you're not being redundant with every single bullet point that you use. Cover letter. One of the things that is very different in Canadian legal employment compared to everywhere else in Canada is that the cover letter really matters. In a lot of other industries, a cover letter is just, hey, here's my application, please consider it, ask me in for an interview. Whereas in a Canadian legal application, it really is your chance to show me what is your writing like. We often in law assign one-page memos to juniors to say, hey, we need to send a memo to the client. Can you lay out what your argument is in one page? This is the kind of skill we're looking to see that you have on a cover letter. Can you, on one page, lay out your argument for why I should hire you? And so you need to treat it as such. It needs to be well structured. It needs to really focus in on why you are the right fit for me. It needs to create a narrative telling about who you are because, again, you are more than just what you've done and where you've studied. You need to figure out your one-on-one connection to why my firm, why you want to be here, why you work with our team, why you fit in with us. And so it has to be more narrative in structure so that I understand not just the facts of your past experience, but the application of how everything you've done and everything you've studied makes you the ideal candidate for me right now. And so, in many times when I'm working one-on-one with our students, I sometimes say, treat this like a thesis. Your thesis is hire me. And so every paragraph should be a proof about why you should be hired. And so always have a topic sentence. Make sure your proofs highlight what your topic sentence argument is and link it back to your thesis of why you deserve this job with this firm right now. And so, all that to say, it must be tailored because I will be able to tell if you can lift out my law firm and replace it with any other law firm, or you wrote one sentence about my office and then it's the same kind of change up with the next employer. Avoid vague language, avoid unqualified, unproven statements. Where possible, always prove your point with examples, with, things that you can refer back to from your resume. And so a typical cover letter I see that's not particularly exciting is this, right? An address, a salutation. Hi, I'm an internationally trained lawyer. I'm looking to learn and grow. And like I said earlier, who isn't looking to learn and grow? And then usually there's a paragraph about an experience. And then there's a paragraph about skills. And then I'm looking forward to hearing from you. This is a fine cover letter. It's not bad. And I know lots of you probably have a cover letter that looks like this right now. And so I'm not trying to say that that's awful, but I'm trying to say that this is very typical. It's something that I see over and over again, which means I know basically that you're already telling me experiences that are on your resume. You've already highlighted skills on your resume. So what are you adding? by writing this as a cover letter. And so in the alternative, think about, again, writing this like a thesis, where if your thesis is, I deserve this job, then each paragraph should be centered around a proof about why you deserve this job. And it doesn't not necessarily just need to be about your skills or your experiences. It can be about your passion for client service. It can be about your excitement about this area of law and how it's weaved its way throughout your education and your experiences. And so think about, again, what you want the employer to know about you and how you tell me the story. What have you always been, driven by? What is the connecting points to all of the different places you've worked in before and how it connects to this current workplace? And so you can see it's more storytelling than it is a reiteration of what your resume is. Your experiences also then need to be curated in a way to not just say, hey, look at what I did back then and how impressive it is. It's why those experiences matter to you as a potential employer. It's not just, here are the skills I developed over 10 years of practice back home. It's how do the 10 years of skills you develop back home make you the ideal candidate for me in Canada right now? And so again, refer back to the job, refer back to the employer, refer back to this role. And in writing this, it will become more a story about who you are and what you're driven by and what you're passionate about, rather than just a reiteration of everything that's already on your resume. And then finally, hopefully you get the job with all of your application materials and we get to job interviews. Make sure then you go through your application to see, do I have something to say about every single bullet point on my resume? And again, this should help you inform how you write your bullet points, because if your bullet point is, I research relevant laws and statutory regulations, well, then if I asked you, oh, tell me about that, you don't have a minute or two to say about that. And so you want to also think about in every bullet point, is there a minute or two I can say about this if I were to be asked about it in an interview? One of the things that are common in Canadian interviews, but especially Canadian legal interviews, is a behavioral-based interview question, which are situational. They're asking you how to problem solve. They can be posed either as a hypothetical situation or as an example that you have to tell me about. So for example, a behavioral-based interview question might be something like, tell me a time when you've made a mistake. And the employer is not looking to see a time where you've been a failure. They're trying to see, how do you problem solve having made a mistake? Do you address it? Do you problem solve it? Do you fix it? Do you have strategies in place to deal with it? And so there's a very common method for answering behavioral-based interview questions, which is the STAR method. You can find lots of videos out online, and on, even legal employer websites. But there's an approach to answering this where you address what the situation is, what your task in that situation was, what all the actions you take to address that problem were, and then also what the result is, whether that's result of what that problem situation was or what the result in terms of process changes you've made to avoid making that mistake in the future are. So practicing behavioral-based interview questions are going to be important, especially for law students who are used to thinking of a good answer, but not actually used to saying it out loud. Private sector and public sector interviews are also slightly different. Private sector interviews tend to be more behavioral-based interview questions, more sort of interpersonal, trying to get to know you, whereas Canadian public sector employers are more substantive. They're asking you to what you know about the law. Have you studied some of the things that they do? What are some of the Supreme Court judgments that govern their office? And so you're going to need to study for that in a little bit more like an oral exam, rather than the private sector interviews that are more about getting to know you. And then again, I'm just going to reiterate, practice your answers out loud. Again, lawyers, law students are great at thinking up an amazing answer. Not everybody's eloquent enough to get that out loud. And so practice out loud in front of a camera, record yourself on Zoom, whatever it takes. And then similar to Megan, feel free to always reach out to us, our recruitment office. You can always direct questions to us through our recruitment office as well, but they can answer a lot of information about the kinds of resources that we can offer LLM students.
Thank you so much, Michael, really for that insightful presentation. There's so many great takeaways. I think one of the biggest takeaways is that succeeding as an internationally trained legal professionals isn't just about credentials. And you made such great points about just right from the beginning, right from building relationships to approaching the job search strategically. And I think the most important shift for a newcomer is just embracing the mindset, right, that is needed to navigate the Canadian
Absolutely.
market. I mean, that is so important. We do put so much emphasis on our learning skills and technical skills, but we do forget the soft skills that are so relevant, right? So, I have Megan has been answering tons of questions on the chat. I wanted to ask you. The buzzword seems to be AI right now. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on, do Canadian law firms and legal recruiters, do they view AI assisted applications differently? Is there a right way, wrong way to use AI in the legal job application process?
So one of the things that I think a lot of candidates can be alleviated by is law is reticent to change and takes a long time to adapt to change. However, that's not to say that law firms aren't aware that applicants are using AI. And so I think, at least in my approach with our students, it's not that you shouldn't use AI in your applications, but you should use it well. You should use
Mm.
it smartly because as somebody who also uses AI, I can tell when it's AI generated slop and it's not saying anything in particular. And so I think use it as a tool, but not as a final product. One of the things that I found really helpful recently is I attended a meeting where legal recruiters actually came in to talk about the recruitment process.
Mhm.
And so I'll give you an anecdote. This is one of the big firms in all of Canada. They have multiple locations across Canada. And what they did is they went through the recruit, reviewing everything by um, people. So every application was read. They shortlisted all of their candidates. They interviewed and they selected their final candidates. After that recruitment process, they actually put it through an AI that they were training. And
Wow.
so they had their AI tool also go through all of the applications to see would the AI select the same candidates. And I think they said that they sort of had like a 92 or 93% similarity with what the AI chose versus what the employer chose. And they said that wasn't good enough because it didn't choose every single candidate that they were interested in. They were not going to roll out using this just yet because
Mhm.
it wasn't as nuanced in the candidate selection as they were. And so I think employers are not using it as much, but
Mm.
at least as an applicant perspective, you want to use it well. Again, I can always tell when people are using it and they're not sure what it's saying, or I question them on why did you write your paragraph or the sentence this way? And they're like, well, I'm not sure. And it's clear that they didn't write it. In telling your story in a cover letter, it has to sound like you. It has to sound like your story. And AI is not going to know all the nuances of your stories and your experiences. And so it's great as a beginning, but not as a final product.
Well said. Absolutely. You also, in the beginning, emphasized the importance of networking. And this is a challenge across the board, irrespective of professions, for newcomers. For someone who's just arrived in Canada, obviously doesn't have a very extensive professional network yet. What's the very first step you'd recommend to someone who's looking to, build a network here in Canada?
My first step is really just starting. There are so many internationally trained lawyers at this point. I think the most recent statistic over the last couple of years is that about a third of people who are becoming lawyers are internationally trained. And so a third of the Canadian lawyers from the last couple of generations are internationally trained, which means you're going to find somebody who came from your home jurisdiction. You're going to
Mhm.
find somebody who's gone through the struggles that you've gone through. And so start your outreach with other internationally trained lawyers, start with your communities that you're comfortable with, because there are going to be lawyers there as well. But then don't just end your networking in the places you're comfortable at. Use who you've met in that first meeting to leverage yourself to somebody you might not be as comfortable meeting yet, somebody who is from a different country, somebody who is Canadian born, somebody who is a little bit more senior, so that you get practice not only networking with people you're comfortable with, but you constantly push yourself to network with people outside of those circles and further beyond.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much, Michael, for those insights. There's so much to take away, right, from those slides, and I hope everyone who's logged in today has have asked their questions in the chat. If not, both Megan and Michael have been kind enough to leave their contact details, so do reach out to them. I think we are heading into our wrap up, so I am going to begin by thanking everyone who attended our web conference series. This was in partnership with Osgoode Professional Development. A special thanks again to Megan Thomas and Michael Tam for joining us today and sharing their insights and expertise with everyone. If you've missed anything, this web conference will be posted on our website, that's canadianimmigrant.ca, for you to rewatch. And if you have any questions, you can email us at info@canadianimmigrant.ca. Also, before you go, be sure to register for our next session in our webinar series on August 28th with Canadian Immigrants resident career coach Murli Murthy, where we will be exploring how recruiters are using AI to screen candidates, something that Michael spoke about quite eloquently right now, and how you can all stay one step ahead in today's evolving job market. So thank you again, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.